Hey guys, this is week 34 of my series titled 52 Weeks of Reaper. Every week for 52 weeks, I'll be releasing a new video focusing on a key feature in Reaper. So let's jump right in. So for this week, our topic and our focus will be rendering in Reaper. So this is a very deep topic and I don't want the video to run on too long. So this topic will be broken into two videos over the next 2 weeks, this week and next week. So for this week, I just want to introduce that window, touch on some key basic features that are still very unique. And then next week, we're going to dive into some more complex, unique features. So to open that window, we can go up here to the file menu and then come down to where it says render. And if you notice over here, we have the keyboard shortcut of Control, Alt, and R. So we can use either method to open it. So now that we are here, we're gonna try and go through this window from top to bottom. So I want you to notice that these areas are sectioned off in specific categories. So we have our source, we have our output, we have our options, and then we have format. And it's important that you remember that when we get to the preset section. So just like most render windows in most stores, some of these options are very familiar. So starting with source, you can select what source is that output coming from. So by default, it's gonna be outputting the render through your master mix. But we click on the drop-down menu and we have all these options here. So we have selected track stems, we have mix plus stems, so master mix plus stems. We also have selected tracks via master. We have region render matrix via master. We have selected media items via master. We have selected media items as one file. And then we have a bunch of razor edit options. Some of these I'll touch on, some of these I'm not gonna touch on, but I just want you to understand that all these options are there when you start thinking about rendering. And next week, I'm gonna go into some scenarios which will put these options into more perspective, more of a use case perspective. So you'll have an understanding of how it all works in a real case scenario. So over here now, by the bounds section, we have basically, you can select your range of where you want to export. So from what starting point to what endpoint. So by default, it usually starts at entire project. Then we have custom range here. We have time selection, which is what I use most times. And that's basically whatever time selection you have selected up here. Then we have all project regions, selected regions, all project markers, selected markers. Some of these I'll touch on, some of them I won't, but just so that you know that it's there. Once you select a time region, you have options that open up here. It shows you the selected time range based on your settings with the bounds. Then it'll show you your start, end time, and the overall length. Over here, you have the option to add a tail. So you can actually just add a tail from here, 1000 milliseconds by default, which is 1 second. You can change that number or you can uncheck this box. Then right here, this is pretty basic stuff. We have the output area where you will select the directory or the folder where you want your stuff to be rendered to. So you can click on that browse button, go right here where it says browse for file, and it'll usually go to the directory of your project and then you can browse, create folders, and then set your file name here, or you can come back and set your file name here. And we'll talk about some of this stuff in great detail when it comes to wildcards and some of these other options. Then down here we have our options section, which is dealing with the audio quality and the audio stereo field. So we have sample rate, we have stereo, we can do mono, we can do multi-channel output. So you can render a WAV file in Reaper with multiple tracks in that one WAV file, which I think I showed way early in this series, maybe within week 1, 2, or 3, where I had a WAV file that had probably like 8 different tracks in it, but it's just a single WAV file. Right here we have this full speed option. So it's just a render speed option if you want to render offline full speed, 1x offline, online render. When you do an online render, it renders in real time. You will hear it playing back in real time as it's rendering. We have online render idle. I don't know what these two are. I've never used them, but they are there. Then we have some options here. Some of this stuff I'm not going to go into, but we have resample settings. And as far as I know, this one should be the highest. The one that I have here selected, interpolation 768 point, very slow. Then we have an option here to actually normalize. So sometimes when I'm doing something like a rough mix down, or even if it's just something that I'm just started working on, I recorded the vocals, did some rough editing, did some rough levels. My mixes are usually very quiet, and I want to render it out to start listening to it on my headphones and, you know, get more ideas, or listen to it in the car the next day. And sometimes I don't want to be bothered with putting a limiter on and compression and trying to boost up the levels to get it at a decent level to listen to it. And they have the option here where you can basically open this area and you have options to basically set up limiting, set up normalizing options. And these will actually work after you render the file. So you'll see the file render, and then after it's done, it's gonna go back over it. It's gonna normalize it based on the normalized settings that you set, which they have a lot of options here. Then if you set up brick wall limiting, it's gonna do the limiting on the file in post after you render it out. And then there's a bunch of options here within that. So you can, once you start selecting options in here, the box will automatically be checked. If you come back later and you don't want to use that, you just uncheck it and then keep moving on. There's some more options here. I'm not gonna go through all of it, but there are lots of options for different reasons. Like this second pass render. At first I didn't understand it until I saw somebody explain it. I was like, okay, it makes sense. Sometimes in a certain scenario that might be needed. But what it is let's say you're rendering something and it's 4 bars. But at the end of the 4 bars, there is a sound that rings out or a reverb that rings out. But for whatever reason, you want that ambience to also be at the beginning, you would set it to do a second pass where it'll basically loop around, and that tail sound at the end will basically be at the beginning as if you were playing it live on a loop. So it'll start with the tail fading off into the beginning, and it won't cut off. So that might be needed when you're creating a loop or in certain sound design scenarios, it might be needed. So the option is there, and basically it'll just render whatever you're rendering twice. It'll do it one time and then it'll just loop and start right back around. And it's capturing the second instance, the second attempt, and that's what's going to be saved to the file. So if there's a tail, the tail is going to now be at the beginning. So hopefully that made sense. There's delay render start. I don't know why you would need that, but it's there. I'm sure there's a scenario. We have metadata here, so we can check and we can add metadata, and the metadata options are very detailed. I'm not gonna go through that in this video, but it is there for you to set up metadata in various different metadata styles and formats. I know the most common one that I'm used to is the ID3 for MP3s, but they have a wide range of metadata formats, and just all the metadata you could fill out, all the slots are there. The cool thing about it is that there is a metadata preset, so you can save your metadata as preset. So when you go back to do something like you're rendering out an MP3, I have a metadata preset that I select, and then I just change the appropriate things that need to be changed for that file, instead of me having to fill out the whole thing from scratch. So metadata is there, you fill it out, and then you check this box, and it'll make sure that all that metadata gets written to the file. So down here we get to our format section, where we can select file formats. So you see a wide range of formats here, from WAV to AIFF to CAF, which I don't know what that is, raw PCM data, audio CD image, Cuban format, DDP, FLAC, MP3, OGG Vorbis, OGG Opus, video formats. So they have FFmpeg, we have MPEG-4, video, GIF, or GIF, depending on what part of the internet you scream into, and video LCF, I don't know what that is, wave pack, lossless compressor, tons of formats. So yes, you can render out video from Reaper, and then based on the format that you choose, you have some of these compression settings for lossy and or lossless file settings with compression and all that good stuff. Down here we have some extra options. I know for WAV, if you select the WAV format, you have the option to embed tempo right here. So that's good for a lot of different reasons. One reason, if you're creating loops, loop packs, you definitely can have the tempo be embedded, and basically whatever the tempo of the project is will be embedded in the file. So that's always good to know. For WAV, you got your bit depth right here, and you have that the WAV 64 format here that you can set for the audio chunk style. So just all the features you would need, the options you would need. There is an option here to add the rendered file immediately back into the track on a new track. So you can check that if that's something you want to do, and it'll do exactly what it says. It'll create a new track and then add that new rendered file to the current project. There's an option here for silently increment file names to avoid overwriting. So it won't ask you anything or tell you anything about files being overwritten, because it'll just automatically start to increment the file. So it'll go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. If you keep rendering the same file name, it'll just incrementally number them automatically if you check that option. And then these two options here is just basically what do you want to happen when the render is done. So auto return to this dialog when finished, and also auto close all render windows when finished. One other cool feature is there are two tabs here. One says primary output format, the other one says secondary format. So you can set up for it to render WAV right here, and then go to secondary output format and then select MP3. So all these other settings, it'll adhere to that, but it'll spit out an MP3 file along with a WAV file in the folder that you set for the render to happen to. And if you notice, now that I added that, down here it says render to files. And that's another cool thing about Reaper, is it shows you how many files are gonna be rendered. And you'll see why that's important. If not in this video, definitely in next week's video when I start showing you some real world rendering examples and we get deeper into this whole render window. So if I come back here and then put this back to no secondary output, notice this dynamically changes back to render one file. So it's always telling you on the render button, this is the button to execute your render. It'll let you know how many files will be rendered based on the job that you're setting up here, your render task. Two more things to touch on in this video is Reaper has the ability to save presets for your renders. So all these settings that you set up, if they're settings that you use often, you can save that as a preset right up here. So you hit this button and you get this drop down menu here. And not only can you save it as presets, they also broke it up into those sections. So that's why I said earlier on to pay attention to those sections that I pointed out, is because you can save presets for just the bounds and output settings. You can save presets for just the option and format settings, and you can set render presets for all the settings. So you see I have some here based on things that I do a lot. So I can just quickly select that preset, and based on what I called it, the presets will be configured for that, whether it be MP3, video file formats, WAV format, all the different settings that I set. So you can say, I wanna have specific settings for my bounds and options based on something that I render out a lot. And you also wanna have separately settings for the option and format section. So here and here. And you can keep flipping through those different settings, and then you do the others manually, or it can be all settings. So you have all your settings set up, and then you go here and save that as a preset that you can always jump to. So I don't think I've ever seen that in any other DAW. Please let me know in the comments if you have. But this is one of the key things that makes Reaper very flexible, very feature rich, and very unique. And one thing, the last thing I want to point out is the whole time when you have this render window open, the project is still active. You can have the window open. Let me zoom out, and you can still go back to your project, click around, change the time selection. You guys probably didn't notice that I did that earlier while the render window is still open. I didn't get that error message, that bloom, because you're clicking something outside of the render window. You can still interact with your project. You can still open windows. You can still open your mixer. You can still add plugins if you want to. I can come over here, click on this channel, open this up. I can load my plugin. I can try to add something with routing. I can open up my plugin picker, add a plugin on the master bus. I can do all these things with the render window still open. This does happen to me sometimes where I'm setting something up and I forgot to set something in the project, but I'm here setting up the render options and I set up the path and the format and all that good stuff. And there's something I needed to pan or a level I needed to change in the project or something I needed to mute in the project before I render. If I now hit cancel after doing all the settings, when I go back, it's gonna start me from scratch. But with Reaper, you don't have to hit cancel. You can still go in, mute what you needed to mute, solo what you needed to solo. You can still interact with your session while this window is open. Just move it over to the side, move it over to another monitor if you have that, and leave it open. Still do your tweaks, and then you can come back, and based on what you're doing and how you're rendering, the changes may reflect in this window, which I'll show you more next week when we go into some very specific and unique scenarios where you will see this render number count change because I went in and highlighted some items right here while the window is open, and then all of a sudden now it says 3 renders or 4 renders, 4 files will be rendered. So I've never seen this in any program where you open a render window and you're still able to interact with the project and make adjustments before you hit render, and you don't have to close the render window just to go back and do your tweaks and edits. So I forgot what they call it, but it has something to do with active window something. They got some special name for it. I don't remember the technical term for it. There are a few windows where it is open and you can't interact with the program until you close it, but the render window is not one of them. And there are a lot of windows in Reaper where you can open them, do what you gotta do. You can still have them open and still interact with the project. So once again, full featured, very, very well thought out functions in Reaper. And you're starting to see the theme with this series with Reaper, how every facet is well thought out, and from the conception of the idea of whatever the feature is, they don't just stop there, they're continuously updating, which I'll go deeper into that next week in next week's video, because some of the stuff I'm going to talk about with the render window, it gets very detailed, and some of the features I'm going to show you, some of them just dropped this year while I'm doing this series, like a month ago. Some of them they just released maybe the end of 2024. They're constantly adding more features, and you're like, what more can they add? And they keep adding more. Very useful, very functional features, not gimmicks, very, very functional, useful features that you are gonna use when you get to that feature. Very, very, very useful. So you can tell that the team, they're thinking about it, they're putting their heads together, and they are looking at use cases, they're looking at what everybody's doing, they're looking at what the customer base needs, and they're meeting those needs. Not to go off on a tangent, but you know, the video is pretty much over, so I can do this. I hate when I see things being done in a way that doesn't make sense based on the market and what everybody else is doing. It always drives me crazy. So it's like whenever I see companies do that, and I'm not just talking about DAWs, I see it in cars, I see it all over. And then, you know, the standard is everybody does this, and then one car company just doesn't catch on. And it's just like every software does this way, and then this one DAW company just doesn't catch on, and they're doing it in the most backwards, antiquated way, and you're just wondering, do you see what everybody else is doing? Why are you doing this like this? So I really appreciate Reaper and the team for the fact that these features are well thought out and very refined, very detailed, very feature rich, and very useful. Not gimmicky, useful features. So something as, I would say, quote unquote, boring as the render window has so much interesting features and facets to it, where it's like, yes, I can see myself using that, and that's gonna come in handy when I'm doing XYZ, ABC. It's not just there like, okay, that's cool, but it's very gimmicky and it's very rare that I'll be using that. So there's always something for the everyday user, just basic everyday functions that they implement in a way very useful. It's time saving, and it just makes your job a lot easier when you got to do what you have to do in your DAW. So that's my little rant. That's my final thoughts on it. So the render window in Reaper, part 1. Check back next week. We will be diving deeper into the options. There are a lot more very, very intricate options and features. So stay tuned, come back, and we'll dive more into it. So until then, you will see me in the next video. Check out my weekly live streams. I'm always presenting free VST plugins, guys, so check that out. The link is in the description for that playlist. But thanks for watching, and as always, you'll see me in the next video.